He called her inadequate in bed. A few hours later, she was dead. What this pastor was hiding shocked even the police. Tweet where you're watching from and don't forget to subscribe. Adeline Moore had not worn a dress in over a decade, not one that wasn't meant for funerals or someone else's wedding. On the day she stood in front of her hallway mirror smoothing the folds of a soft gray fabric over her hips, she hardly recognized the woman looking back. Her reflection didn't smile, but there was a softness in her eyes, a cautious hope that hadn't visited in years. The faint creases at the corners of her mouth, once carved by grief and routine, seemed less defined. The house was quiet, but not the kind of quiet that haunted. It was expectant, like a breath held just before the exhale. It had been 16 years since her husband, Ronald, died in a car accident on his way home from a late shift. He was 39, full of energy, planning a trip for their 20th anniversary. 1 hour too late. One distracted driver. One rain-slicked highway. Adeline had buried her husband in the spring, just days before their son Jared graduated from high school. She hadn't spoken much at the service. There were casseroles and hugs, some well-meaning hands patting her shoulder, but she moved through it like a fog. There was no time to collapse. 2 children depended on her. Since then, she had built a life from habits. She worked at the town's public library, ran the weekly book club, baked lemon cakes for the church bazaar, and kept her house in impeccable order. She went to bed at the same time every night, ate at the same small kitchen table, and spoke with her daughter Corey every Sunday afternoon. People respected her, admired her resilience, but no one, not even Adeline herself, had asked if she was happy. Until Corey brought it up. "You don't even try, Mama," she said one night over tea. "You've done everything for everyone else. When are you going to let someone do something for you?" Adeline had smiled in that tight, gentle way of hers, stirring her cup. "It's not that simple." Corey was persistent. She had a way of speaking that landed like a hammer wrapped in silk. "You deserve to be touched again, held. You deserve laughter in your kitchen, someone to kiss your hand while you slice fruit. That's not teenage nonsense. That's love." Adeline wanted to scoff, but didn't. The truth, sharp and inconvenient, was that she had not been touched in years, not really. And when Cora mentioned a man she'd recently met through the work, someone older, kind, steady, Adeline had politely nodded but didn't pursue it. That was months ago. Then came Marden Brooks. He was introduced not through Corey, but through proximity. A man who existed just on the edge of her world for years, facilitating weddings, speaking at community forums, offering sound bites of wisdom without ever seeming self-righteous. Marden had charisma, the kind that didn't announce itself loudly but settled around him like a scent. He walked into a room and people instinctively turned. At 45, he was 6 years her junior but carried himself with practiced maturity. His skin was pale, nearly porcelain in shade, with barely there freckles that surfaced only in certain light. He had the voice of someone who'd been listened to his entire life, measured, deep, unhurried. Adeline first truly spoke with him at a town planning board meeting where she was representing the library. He stood to speak about community development and mentioned his side work with men's personal growth programs. His tone was pleasant, polished. He complimented her point about literacy being tied to economic development and said he admired people who invested in small minds becoming big minds. She didn't think of it again until he appeared at the library a week later. He returned a book someone else had borrowed, but lingered by the new arrivals, watching her shelve hardcovers. You don't remember me, do you?" he asked, not accusing, just smiling. She hesitated, tilting her head. "We met at the planning board. You made a better point than half the men in the room. I just wanted to say thank you for what you do here." The words came easily to him, and Adeline, cautious by nature, kept the exchange brief. But when he returned a second time, and then a third, bringing coffee, offering to carry boxes, helping move some shelves before a city inspection, she found herself smiling more than usual. He didn't flirt, not exactly. He paid attention. One Saturday afternoon, he waited outside after closing with a small paper bag. "Lemon tart," he said, "from that bakery you always glance at but never go in. I figured you might not let yourself." It was absurd and somehow perfect. They began having lunch once a week at a diner off Main Street. He never pressured, never pried. He asked questions and actually listened. He told stories about officiating awkward weddings, people fainting at the altar, brides forgetting vows. She laughed, genuinely. She found herself telling him about Ronald, about Jared and Corey, about her long-lost dream of opening a second-hand bookstore. Marden listened like each detail was a pearl. And he looked at her, not through her, not around her, but at her, like she mattered. 3 months passed before he suggested anything more serious. He asked her to come to a dinner with some friends, then a small hike, then a movie. He never kissed her in public. He didn't call late at night. He moved with precision, always careful, never overwhelming. Then, one afternoon, after they had walked by the lake and sat in the gazebo in silence, he said, "I would like to build a life with you." Adeline laughed, thought it was a joke. "That's a big statement." "I mean it." His tone was steady. "We're not 20. We don't need years to know something when it's clear. You make me feel quiet inside. That's not a small thing." He didn't propose with a ring. There was no one-knee spectacle. He said they could go to the courthouse, make it simple. She hesitated. "I don't need flowers," he said. "I just want you beside me when I wake up." She went home that night and sat at her kitchen table until the sky turned dark. Her heart was loud in her chest. She hadn't imagined a second marriage. She had lived a life of symmetry and safety. And yet, when she thought of Marden, she didn't feel afraid. She felt noticed. Jared was skeptical, but said nothing. Corey, on the other hand, was thrilled. "Mama, this is it. I told you. You waited long enough." They married on a Thursday. The ceremony took less than 10 minutes. She wore a pale lavender dress with a silver brooch her mother had given her. He wore a dark gray suit, no tie, clean lines. They had dinner afterward at a small restaurant with Jared and Corey, a few cousins, and the notary who married them. There was no cake, no dancing, no speeches, just a toast. "To new chapters," Marden said, raising his glass. Adeline smiled. Her fingers were still cold from nerves, but she felt light. That night, back home, she lay in bed beside her new husband and listened to the rhythm of his breathing. He didn't touch her, just lay there, staring at the ceiling. He said he was tired. She didn't mind. She wasn't sure she was ready. The next morning, she made breakfast, humming to herself. For the first time in years, she didn't eat alone. In the following days, everything moved slower. There was no honeymoon. Marden said he had work commitments. But he came home every evening. Sometimes with groceries, sometimes with little stories. He took over the garage, said he wanted to set up a workshop. He kept his own bank accounts. That, he said, was just practical. "We're adults. We don't need to merge everything." Adeline nodded. Still, something settled in her chest like a stone. Nothing specific, just a feeling. a shift. At night, he stared at the ceiling. He didn't speak much, and when she reached out to touch his hand, he flinched, just slightly. Enough for her to notice, enough to make her wonder if she had imagined the warmth he once showed her. But it was only the beginning. The days following the wedding were filled with a stillness Adeline couldn't quite name. There were no celebrations, no out-of-town relatives calling to congratulate them, no flurry of newlywed excitement. It was, in every sense, quiet. Martin returned to his usual rhythm without interruption. He left the house each morning by 8, returned by 6, sometimes later, depending on what he called community engagements. There were no photographs hung, no rings posted on social media, no introductions made to his extended circle. He had friends, he mentioned them often, but they never came to the house. He told Adeline they'd meet in time, that he liked the idea of keeping things intimate, sacred. She didn't argue. She had never craved attention. The quiet suited her for a while. The first shift came with the rules. They weren't announced so much as introduced casually, wrapped in the language of preference. "I prefer the living room lights off after 9, he said one evening, flipping the switch before she'd finished her crossword. "Too much stimulation before bed." Another day, "I'd appreciate it if we kept the hallway clear of shoes. It disrupts the line of sight. Bad feng shui." She laughed at first, thinking it charming. He had little routines. Everyone did. Ronald used to stack dishes a particular way, believed in folding towels in thirds. But this was different. Martin didn't explain himself. When she forgot and left her scarf draped over the banister, he didn't say anything. He simply folded it, placed it in her room, and moved her chair an inch to the left at dinner, as if reminding her of the boundaries. There was no violence in it. No shouting. That was what made it feel manageable. But something in her began to tighten. Their first real night together came a week after the wedding. She had been waiting, unsure if he was simply respecting her space or uninterested altogether. That evening, he came home without a word, placed his keys in the bowl, changed into a crisp white t-shirt and navy pajama pants, and entered the bedroom while she was brushing her hair. He didn't kiss her, didn't ask. He sat on the bed and said, "We should consummate this." Adeline, startled, offered a nervous smile. "I thought maybe you were waiting, giving us time." "I've waited," he replied. "We're married. This is part of it." There was no seduction, no build-up. He pulled back the covers, lay down, and gestured. She followed because that's what she thought she should do. He moved with precision, like someone completing a task. His touch wasn't cruel, but it was empty. When she whispered his name, hoping to meet his eyes, he kept them closed. When she winced at the pressure, he didn't pause. Afterward, he rolled over and faced the wall. She went to the bathroom, sat on the closed toilet lid, and stared at the floor for a long time. She didn't cry. She didn't even know what she felt. Disconnected, maybe, like someone else had taken her place in her own life. The following morning, Martin made eggs and toast and didn't mention anything. He complimented her on the way she ironed his shirts. He asked if she could pick up his dry cleaning that afternoon. She nodded, saying nothing. As the days passed, the rules grew. He began insisting on scheduled meal times. Breakfast at 8, lunch by noon, dinner no later than 6:30. If she was even 10 minutes late placing a plate on the table, he'd sigh and say, "Discipline is the foundation of harmony." She found herself adjusting. She rewrote her work schedule to accommodate his demands, no longer stayed after hours at the library. When he asked, why she wasn't bringing home more variety in groceries, she added new items. When he criticized the way she scrubbed the sink, she bought stronger detergent. It felt easier to comply than to defend. The silence between them thickened. One evening, she laughed during a phone call with Corey. Martin walked into the room, paused, and stood in the doorway. He didn't interrupt. He didn't speak. Just watched. Adeline's laugh died in her throat. She hung up sooner than she'd intended. When she turned, he was gone. Later, when she asked if something was wrong, he replied, "There are volumes in a voice. You don't need to be loud to be disrespectful." She tried to apologize, unsure for what exactly. He nodded and kissed her forehead, then went to his workshop in the garage. It was then she noticed how often he retreated there, sometimes for hours. He'd emerge only to shower or eat. The garage, once cluttered with holiday storage boxes and gardening tools, had transformed into something else. She wasn't invited to see. He said it was his space. "Men need solitude," he explained. "That's how we stay stable." Still, she respected that boundary. She had been raised to let men lead their own way. Her father had been a quiet man. Ronald had his rituals. But neither had made her feel like a tenant in her own home. Martin's presence was peculiar in that way. It filled every corner even when he wasn't speaking. The air changed when he walked in. Her breath shortened. Her spine straightened. She had begun to monitor herself, how she chewed, how she dressed, how long she lingered in the bath. Once, when she left her hair wrapped in a towel for too long, he said, "That's not attractive. You should care more about presentation." Another time, she sat on the porch with a novel, wearing an old cardigan. He looked at her and said, "You're not alone anymore. Let's act accordingly." She wanted to ask him what that meant, but stopped herself. Jared noticed something in her voice when they spoke on the phone, a pause between sentences, a delay before laughter. He asked if everything was okay. "Of course," she said quickly, "just tired." Corey texted more often, asked for selfies, wanted to come visit. Adeline deflected with excuses, busy at the library or Martin's been working odd hours. She didn't want to worry them. It wasn't bad, she told herself, just new. Adjustment took time. One afternoon, while dusting the hallway, she bumped into the framed photograph of her wedding day. It had been propped discreetly on the entryway table. The frame cracked at the edge. She picked it up, studied the image. She looked nervous in the photo. Martin's smile was minimal, almost unreadable. No one else was in the frame. It had been taken by a server at the restaurant after the ceremony. She set it aside, meaning to replace the glass. The photo never reappeared. Later that night, Martin said, "We don't need to memorialize a moment. The real test is what we do after." He had a way of turning statements into doctrine, closing the door on conversation. Adeline nodded, but deep inside, something began to press against her ribs. A whisper she hadn't heard in years. Not fear, not quite, but its cousin, unease. In bed, Martin pulled the sheets up to his chest and turned his back to her. "You should try being more available," he murmured, almost too quietly to catch. "I don't like feeling unwanted." Adeline stared at the ceiling for a long time, her eyes wide in the dark. That night, she didn't sleep. It began with his silence. After that quiet mutter in the dark, after telling her he didn't like feeling unwanted, Martin retreated even further, pulling his voice into himself and leaving her with only the weight of his presence. He stopped touching her during the day. No small brushes of his fingers against hers when she passed him the remote. No casual hand on her lower back when they passed in the hallway. His eyes grew distant, glassy. But at night, his body returned, not with warmth or intimacy, but with purpose. Clinical, controlling, cold. The second time he came to her without asking, it was late. She had been lying awake for hours, trying to quiet her thoughts. He entered the bedroom, not speaking, pulling back the sheet that covered her. She, startled, turned to him. "Martin?" she whispered. He didn't respond, just placed a hand on her hip and pushed. She let him, unsure of what would happen if she resisted. The act was over quickly, without tenderness or acknowledgement. When it ended, he stood, wiped himself with her bath towel, and left the room. The next morning, she found the towel crumpled on the floor, damp and cold. She didn't mention it, didn't know how. There was no language for the ache growing inside her, no easy explanation for the sensation that she had been present but not seen, touched but not known. She told herself it was just another form of adjustment. They were still figuring each other out. She had waited so long for love. Perhaps it simply looked different at this age, but by the third time that excuse dissolved. He came again, unannounced, climbing onto the bed and positioning her as if she were an object to be rearranged. This time he used his hand to silence her. When she cried out, he pressed harder, the palm firm against her mouth. She struggled briefly, but not enough. She froze, the way small animals do when the shadow passes overhead. Afterward, he kissed her forehead. "You'll get better," he said, as if offering encouragement after a failed recital. "Don't worry." She didn't sleep the rest of the night. Her body ached in places she couldn't describe. Her thoughts whirled in dizzying loops. In the morning, she called the library and asked for 2 days off. She told her supervisor she felt ill. In truth, she just couldn't bear the thought of speaking to anyone. Her body didn't feel like her own. He left that morning without a word. That afternoon, she sat on the bathroom floor with her knees pulled up to her chest and stared at the tile until the shadow shifted across the walls. When she looked down at herself, at the bruises forming on her inner thighs, she reached for her phone. She called the Women's Health Clinic 2 towns over. She gave a false name. The nurse on the line was kind, didn't press for details. Adeline booked the earliest appointment available and drove herself the next day. She wore sunglasses, even though the day was overcast, pulled her sweater sleeves down to her knuckles, and waited in the clinic lobby with her hands folded tightly in her lap. When her name was called, she followed the nurse with quiet obedience. The exam was routine. The doctor asked if there was discomfort. Adeline said yes. He asked if she had been sexually active recently. "A few times," she whispered. He nodded, asked nothing more. The physical revealed no major injury, no infections, no visible tearing, but the nurse noted in the chart that the patient appeared anxious, withdrawn. When asked if she felt safe at home, Adeline hesitated and said yes, but her voice trembled slightly. They offered her pamphlets. She took them and never opened them. She returned home before Martin arrived. She reheated leftovers and set the table for 2. When he walked in, he kissed her on the cheek and said, "Smells good," as if nothing had happened, as if her body had not been used, her voice muted beneath the weight of his hand. That night, he did not approach her. He stayed in the garage until after midnight. She could hear soft movements beneath the floorboards, his tools maybe, something mechanical humming. She tried to call Corey the next day, but hung up before the phone finished ringing. What could she say? That she was uncomfortable? That her husband was distant? That she felt like she was being watched, even in her own home? She told herself she was overreacting. She told herself it would pass. But the pattern deepened. Each encounter became more detached. He stopped speaking entirely during the acts. He no longer kissed her, not even in routine. Sometimes he would walk into the bedroom and begin undressing her without asking. If she resisted, even slightly, his grip would tighten. Once she tried to pull his hand away. He responded with silence, then finished quickly and left. Afterward, she lay still, her limbs numb, staring at the ceiling. The stars through the window offered no comfort. She began losing weight. Her appetite vanished. Food lost its taste. Her once favorite tea sat untouched in the pantry. The television remained off. Music hurt her ears. He noticed. "You should take better care of yourself," he said one morning while buttoning his shirt. "This isn't what I signed up for." She didn't respond. That night, she opened her laptop and searched the phrase, "My husband forces me during sex." She closed it again immediately, deleted the search history, hid the device in a drawer. She called the clinic a second time but didn't follow through. Instead, she started taking longer showers, standing beneath the water until it ran cold. She cleaned obsessively. The same corner the kitchen floor scrubbed twice in a day. She rearranged the pantry, ironed towels, folded sheets with perfect edges. She needed to control something. He began making demands. Not in words, but in gestures. He would leave notes on the fridge. Clean garage mat. Fold linens properly. Fix posture. One note read, "Don't sulk. It's unattractive." She flushed it down the toilet. When she failed to comply, left the garage mat unswept for instance, he responded physically. Not with beatings, but with acts that punished. That night, he tied her hands with her scarf. He didn't speak. She didn't protest. She bit her lip until it bled. He whispered afterward, "You made me do that. If you were better at this, we wouldn't have to go this far." She bled slightly the next day. When she stood, she winced. She packed a small bag, put it in the back of her closet, then unpacked it again. There was nowhere to go, nowhere to explain. Who would believe her? He was respected. He was charming. She had no bruises anyone could see. When Corey called that evening, Adeline answered with forced cheer. "I'm just tired, baby. Things are fine." "You sure?" Corey pressed. "You don't sound like yourself." "I'm okay, just adjusting. It's a lot, getting used to someone new." She heard her daughter sigh. "You know you can talk to me, right?" "I know." But she didn't. She told herself again and again that maybe she just needed to try harder, that if she was more attentive, more receptive, he wouldn't have to act this way, that she had been alone for so long, maybe she'd forgotten how to be a wife. One night, he brought home a set of lingerie. It was black, sheer, expensive looking. "I want to see you in this tomorrow," he said, placing it on her side of the bed. She looked at the garment, then at him. He raised an eyebrow. "I'm asking nicely. Don't make me repeat myself." She nodded. The next night, she wore it. He didn't smile, didn't compliment, just told her to lie down. He photographed her. She didn't consent. She didn't refuse. She felt her soul detach, hovering above the bed, watching it happen to someone else. After he left, she lay there, still in the lingerie, her skin burning. She didn't change out of it. She couldn't move. That was when she stopped responding to texts. Even Jared, when he called, got voicemail. He left messages. She listened, but didn't answer. She sat on the porch some nights, wrapped in a blanket, staring at the street. Her body, once her own, now felt rented. Her voice, once gentle and warm, now rarely left her throat. The woman in the mirror didn't smile anymore. She didn't recognize herself. By the time September settled across the neighborhood with its cooler air and yellowing leaves, Adeline no longer thought in days. Time had turned into stretches of silence interrupted by obligation. Marden's presence had become both routine and unpredictable. He moved through the house with a sense of absolute ownership, making no effort to hide his disregard for her comfort. And yet, nothing he did was dramatic enough to spark intervention. He didn't bruise her face. He didn't yell or slam doors. He simply broke her down piece by piece, like a craftsman dismantling something he never wanted to understand, only control. She stopped leaving the house unless it was absolutely necessary. He said it was better for her to rest, that he would do the shopping, that people didn't need to see her right now. When she asked if they could have friends over for dinner, he shook his head slowly as if she'd asked something inappropriate. People talk, he said. They don't need to be in our space. Eventually, she stopped asking. One Saturday morning, she walked into the kitchen and reached for the landline to call her son. It was gone. The base, the receiver, everything. Only a pale square of dust remained on the countertop. She asked Marden about it, trying to keep her tone neutral. He didn't look up from his toast. Too many distractions, he said. If you need to reach someone, use your mobile. But her mobile had stopped working the week before. The screen froze after a software update, and Marden had taken it to get it fixed. It hadn't returned. She stood in the doorway, unsure of what to say. Rest, he added without turning. You've been tense. The word sank into her like a hook. Later that day, she searched the closets for the spare phone she used to keep for emergencies. It was gone. She searched the junk drawer, the filing cabinet, her old purse. Gone. Even the outdated charger that used to sit under the lamp had vanished. The isolation became total. Each morning he handed her a list, written neatly in ink on notepaper. Tasks ranged from mundane to oddly specific. Organize pantry by size. Wipe windowsills. Vacuum closet corners. Sweep garage mat. If any item was incomplete when he returned home, he didn't scold her. He didn't even speak. He simply sat at the table in silence, eating his dinner without a word. Those silent dinners became more unbearable than anything he could have said. He began inspecting her work, checking behind curtains for dust, running a finger along baseboards. If she missed something, he would point, not speak. Then he'd disappear into the garage for hours. One afternoon, she accidentally left a dish in the sink. He returned, stared at it, and said, "You're slipping." She apologized. He didn't answer. That night, he tied her hands with cloth napkins from the table and forced her to lie still while he corrected the imbalance. He didn't strike her, but the act itself was punishment. When it was over, he untied her, handed her the napkins, and told her to wash them by hand. Adeline began to withdraw from herself. She stopped looking in mirrors. She moved through the house with slow, careful steps. Her voice became faint, like a person speaking from underwater. Even her clothes changed. She wore loose sweaters, long skirts, nothing that could draw attention. She stopped using perfume. She stopped wearing earrings. When she applied a touch of lipstick one morning out of habit, he looked at her and said, "What's the point of that?" She wiped it off. The kitchen, once her favorite space, began to feel like a minefield. He inspected the fridge regularly, threw out items he didn't like, accused her of wastefulness, told her she was feeding them too many carbs, too much sugar, not enough protein. "You're not a child," he said once. "Start acting like a woman." She said nothing. The quiet had become her armor. When the internet stopped working, she waited for it to return. A week passed, then 2. Finally, she asked him. "Removed it," he said simply. "Don't need all that noise in the house." He had started calling it his house, not theirs, not ours, his. He took over the garage entirely, locked it with a key she never saw. What once stored Christmas boxes and an old lawnmower now served some unknown purpose. She heard sounds from it late at night, metal clinking, low hums, sometimes the faint static of recordings. She was never allowed in. One afternoon, he called her into the hallway. He was standing at the basement door. "Come here," he said. "I want to show you something." She hesitated, then walked slowly toward him. He opened the door, flicked the light on, and gestured for her to go down first. She descended the steps, gripping the wooden handrail tightly. At the bottom, against the far wall, sat a large industrial-grade chest freezer. It was new, gleaming, unplugged. "I got this for emergencies," he said behind her, his voice calm. "Blackouts, storm outages, anything like that." She turned to face him. "Okay." He stepped down onto the basement floor, walked over to the freezer and lifted the lid. It was empty. The interior shone with white plastic and coiled metal. "Lots of space," he said. "Enough for everything important." She nodded slowly, then he looked at her. "You ever think about what happens if you disappoint me too many times?" She froze. His voice was light, almost playful. "Just something to think about," he said, and closed the lid. She walked back up the stairs with trembling legs. He followed behind, his footsteps slow and deliberate. That night, she dreamt she was trapped inside the freezer. She woke up gasping, drenched in sweat, the sheets tangled around her body. The next morning, he gave her a new note. It read, "Fix posture. You've been slumping." She did not respond. She stood in front of the mirror for 20 minutes, adjusting her stance. Shoulders back, spine straight, chin up. She practiced smiling, but it looked wrong. Her eyes looked hollow. She began to watch the clock obsessively, counted the hours until he left, counted the minutes until he returned. She moved through her tasks like a soldier completing drills. Once, she opened the drawer where she used to keep family photos. They were gone. She searched the whole house, every framed memory, her children, her late husband, her parents, vanished. When she asked him, her voice barely above a whisper, he replied, "Too cluttered." He had replaced the frames with abstract art, black and white prints, lines and angles, nothing warm. The house no longer resembled hers. She stopped calling it home. Evenings grew heavier. He became more demanding, required her to be presentable by 7 o'clock. Clean hair, neat clothes, barefoot. He never said why. One evening, he told her to sit on the couch and wait for him. He entered the room 10 minutes later with a camera, asked her to pose. "Smile," he said. She couldn't. He took the photos anyway. The next day, she found a folder on the kitchen counter. Inside were printed images of herself, half-dressed, expressionless. On the front of the folder, written in a marker, "Before correction." She placed the folder in the trash. That night, he didn't speak to her. The following morning, she found her toothbrush replaced with a child's brush. No note. A message, nonetheless. The final straw came when she found her journal missing. A small, leather-bound book she had kept since she was 20. It was where she wrote her thoughts, her fears, the few lines she could not say aloud. She kept it in a drawer beneath her bed. When she asked about it, he smiled faintly. "I read it," he said. "It was naive. You should burn it. Start fresh." She felt something snap deep inside. Not loudly, quietly, like thread pulling taut. That night, she went to the freezer. She opened the lid. It was plugged in now, running. Cold air spilled out over her hands. She stared into it for a long time, her breath fogging in the air. She did not cry. She only closed it gently. Then turned out the light. The morning of October 3rd began with overcast skies and a stillness that settled over the house like a wool blanket. Adeline moved slowly through the kitchen, measuring coffee grounds with unsteady hands, her body bruised in places no one would see, her thoughts a distant fog. She had not spoken a full sentence in 3 days. Martin had not noticed, or if he had, he didn't care to respond. His attention came in short, cold fragments, lists, instructions, reminders that she was a function, not a person. He'd left early that morning, as usual, saying he had meetings. She nodded, as she always did. Once the door closed and the sound of his car faded, she stood still in the hallway for several long minutes, the note still in her hand. Clean Groughton bathroom, iron white shirt, set table for 2 by 7. Smile. That last word was circled. Twice. She crumpled the note slowly and threw it in the bin. Her movements throughout the day were automatic. She ironed the shirt, though her fingers trembled. She set the table, placing the fork exactly 2 inches from the edge of the placemat, aligning the knife parallel with the plate. She reheated the chicken breast he had asked for earlier in the week, added roasted vegetables, and poured wine into the stemmed glass he insisted be used only for dinners he considered deserving of presentation. At 6:43, she took a bottle of over-the-counter sleeping pills from the cabinet. She placed 2 in her palm, then changed her mind and returned them to the bottle. Instead, she opened the door to the basement. The air was cold. The steps creaked beneath her weight. The freezer, humming steadily, seemed to glow faintly in the dim light. She opened the lid and looked inside again, as she had the night before and the night before that. It was clean, white, hollow, like a casket awaiting a body. She didn't cry. She hadn't cried in weeks. By the time Martin returned home at 7:12 p.m., she was seated at the table, her posture perfect, her hands folded in her lap. He walked in, placed his keys in the bowl, and took off his jacket. He glanced at her once, nodded, then walked into the kitchen. "Smells passable," he said. "We'll see." They ate in silence. She chewed slowly, her throat tight. He made one comment about the carrots being overcooked, then offered no further critique. She cleared the plates when he finished, washed them, dried them, and put them away. When she returned, he was already seated on the couch, legs crossed, drink in hand. "Get ready," he said without looking at her. She didn't ask what for. Upstairs, she removed her clothes and changed into the thin black slip he had placed on the bed earlier that day. It was cold against her skin. She pulled her hair back and stood in front of the mirror, seeing not a woman, but a shape. Her body had lost definition. Her eyes were ringed with exhaustion. Her lips were cracked. Still, she smoothed the fabric, turned off the light, and went downstairs. He looked at her once and smiled faintly. "You're learning," he said. Then he stood. She followed him back into the bedroom. The door closed behind them with a whisper. The rest unfolded as it always did, only worse. He did not speak. He bound her wrists with fabric he had cut from an old curtain. He called it restraint by intimacy, said it prevented her from fidgeting, though she never did. He positioned her carefully, precisely. Her body had become a canvas for his rituals. She tried not to think, tried to float somewhere above herself. When he began, it was rougher than before. His breathing heavy, his grip tighter, fingers digging into her skin. She winced, gasped, and for the first time tried to speak. "Please," but he shushed her, placing a hand firmly over her mouth. When she tried to pull away, he pressed harder. The palm flattened against her face, fingers splayed across her cheek. She couldn't breathe. She kicked once, weakly, but he was on top of her, weight full and unrelenting. He didn't stop. He kept going, his breath steady, expression unreadable. When she stopped moving, he paused for only a moment, then continued as if finishing something he had started. By the time he released her, the room had gone silent except for the ticking of the clock on the dresser. She lay still. He sat back, breathing hard, wiped his face, then stood and walked into the bathroom. She didn't follow. When he returned, toweling off his hands, he looked at her. She hadn't moved. He stepped closer, touched her shoulder. No reaction. Her face, pale and still, her lips slightly parted, eyes closed. Her skin had taken on a strange sheen. He touched her neck. No pulse. He stared at her for a long time. Then he muttered, "Shit," and stepped back. For a brief second, he looked stunned. Then, as if flicking a switch, he moved with methodical calm. He dressed quickly, went downstairs, returned with a sheet. Carefully, he wrapped her body, lifting her gently, as if she might wake. He carried her down the basement stairs, her limbs limp against his arms. He opened the freezer, placed her inside, adjusted her legs, folded her arms. Before closing the lid, he looked at her face once more. "You could have tried harder," he said softly. The lid shut with a quiet click. Back upstairs, he cleaned, stripped the bed, washed the sheets, bleached the bathroom, gathered the towel, the bindings, the slip. Everything went into a garbage bag, which he placed in the trunk of his car. He showered, shaved, changed into dark jeans and a black shirt, checked his phone, booked a hotel under a different name. Before leaving, he turned off the hallway lights, locked the front door, and pocketed Adeline's phone. By 10:41 p.m., he was gone. No one knew. No one called. The house stood still, quiet. In the basement, the freezer hummed steadily, undisturbed. The following morning, Corey texted her mother just after 10 o'clock. The message was casual, a simple check-in. "How are you feeling today? Need anything from the store?" It had become routine between them, especially after the wedding. Corey had made it a point to keep in touch more frequently since her mother's life had changed so dramatically. But the message showed delivered and remained unread. That, in itself, wasn't alarming. Adeline often forgot her phone, left it silenced under a cushion or turned off in a purse. Corey thought nothing of it. By evening, however, after another unanswered message and a missed call, Corey felt a twinge of concern. She rationalized it, told herself her mother was probably napping, or had gone to the store. Martin had mentioned once, offhandedly, that Adeline tired easily lately. Maybe she was simply resting. But the silence stretched longer than usual. When Sunday came and still no response, Corey called Jared. He hadn't heard from their mother either. His voice tightened when he said it. "She always calls me Sunday morning," he said. "Always." By Sunday night, Corey had driven past the house twice. The curtains were drawn, the car still in the driveway, lights off. She knocked on the door both times, waited, even peered through the window. Nothing. No movement. No shadow passing behind the drapes. On Monday, the fear that had been a slow burn ignited fully. Jared contacted the police and requested a welfare check. 2 officers arrived just after noon. There was no sign of forced entry, no damage to the locks, no broken windows. The front door was closed, but not bolted. Inside, the house was quiet, neat. almost too neat. The table was cleared. A pot of dried-out vegetables sat on the stovetop, covered. The living room was in order, cushions fluffed, no signs of a struggle, but something felt off. The bedroom, which by Marden's own statements was the one he and Adeline shared, looked untouched. The bed was made with military precision. Not a wrinkle in the spread. No water glass on the nightstand, no slippers nearby. The closet door was closed. A faint scent of bleach lingered in the air. The second bedroom, what had once been Adeline's personal space before the wedding, was more lived in. A sweater draped across the chair, a book left open on the side table, a half-finished cup of tea with a ring of dried liquid around the rim. Her phone was found there too, turned off, the battery dead. No missed calls displayed, no recent messages opened, but the charger was still plugged in next to it. In the hallway, one of the officers paused at the basement door. It was slightly ajar. A faint hum could be heard from within. When they opened it fully, the first thing that struck them was the sterile smell, not decay, but something chemical and artificial, like an overcleaned hospital hallway. They descended slowly. The basement was mostly empty, a few storage shelves, a workbench, but against the far wall, plugged into a socket through a heavy-duty surge protector, stood the freezer. It looked new, too new. White, polished, without a single fingerprint on its handle. They didn't open it immediately. They called it in. The perimeter was secured. Detectives arrived within the hour. Forensics, medical examiners, Jared and Corey were told to remain outside, given only the vague assurance that something had been found and it required immediate investigation. At 6:37 p.m., the lid of the freezer was opened. Inside lay the body of Adeline Moore. She was naked, her limbs curled inward, bound at the wrists with soft restraints. A folded sheet had been wrapped loosely around her lower half, and a pillowcase partially covered her face. There were no visible wounds, no blood, but her skin was pale and smooth with the unmistakable sheen of post-mortem freezing. On closer inspection, bruises were visible on her wrist, her collarbone, and the insides of her thighs. No defensive wounds, no signs of a fight. Her nails were intact, save for one. The index nail on her right hand had snapped off, later found lodged in a corner of the sheet. The forensic team worked methodically. The freezer was photographed, its temperature recorded, the surrounding basement scanned for any prints. Only 2 sets were found, Adeline's and Marden's. By 9 p.m., the home was declared a crime scene. The detectives spoke first with Jared. He was composed, eyes glassy, voice steady. He had noticed his mother growing distant in recent weeks, less responsive, less available. He had assumed she was adjusting to married life. Corey was less composed. Her voice shook. She admitted she had been worried, that something had felt wrong for a while, that her mother had grown quiet, too quiet, that she'd started answering texts with one-word replies, that she never video called anymore. Neither of them had seen Marden in days. A bolo was issued, his name entered into the system. His car, a silver sedan, was located via traffic camera footage heading east out of town late Saturday night. Phone records showed a call to a hotel on the outskirts, booked under a different name. He had paid in cash. No luggage. Surveillance footage from the hotel lobby confirmed he'd arrived with a young woman around 2 in the morning. That woman would later be identified as an escort. While officers searched for Marden, the investigation into his background deepened. What they found stunned everyone. Despite his polished image, Martin Brooks had no real public record of employment in recent years. His work as a pastor was largely self-styled. He had once been licensed to perform weddings through an online ministry, but he had no affiliation with any recognized institution. He presented himself as a mentor, a community builder, but his credentials were non-existent. Worse, the deeper they dug, the more disturbing the picture became. A laptop recovered from the Home Office revealed saved profiles on multiple escort sites, bookings spanning years. Some confirmations dated back to months before the wedding. One profile was still active, under a different name, with saved messages and explicit content, including photographs of Adeline taken without her consent. Hidden folders contained videos. Many featured Adeline, bound, still, unmoving. Others showed women who have yet to be identified. Detectives found no mention of the marriage on any of Martin's social media. No photos, no updates, no shared bank accounts, no merged property. Adeline's name appeared on nothing. No lease, no utilities, no medical records. To the outside world, she did not exist as his wife. When Corey was brought back in for further questioning, her face was pale. She admitted something then, something no one expected. Martin had been close to her before he courted her mother. She hadn't told anyone, said it hadn't felt real, that it started as casual conversation, a few texts, a late coffee, that he was charming, that he made her feel special, smarter, more mature than her peers, that he had touched her thigh once in his car, that she hadn't stopped him, that she had believed for a time he might want her. And then, just like that, he'd stopped calling. A month later, he was dating her mother. She didn't protest the relationship. She told herself it wasn't serious, that maybe she had imagined the connection. But she had been hurt. And when the engagement came, quiet, sudden, without fanfare, she buried the ache deep. When asked about their recent contact, she hesitated. They had been in communication, frequent, more than was appropriate. There had been messages, late nights, conversations that made her feel complicit and confused. Then, with visible shame, she said something else. "I knew she wasn't happy," she whispered. "I knew something wasn't right." When asked why she didn't speak up, her voice broke. "I thought, if she left, maybe he'd come back to me." She did not ask for a lawyer. She did not flee. She stayed through the interviews, her hands shaken, her voice small. She denied knowing anything about the freezer, about what happened that night. And all records, phone pings, location data, transaction history supported her. She had not been at the house. She had not helped him. But she had dreamed, even for a second, what life would be like if her mother weren't there. When Martin was arrested 2 days later, he offered no resistance. He was found in a mid-range motel 30 miles away, lying on the bed, watching television. A bottle of whiskey on the table. The woman with him, another escort, had no idea what had happened. She said he'd been polite, quiet, paid in cash, never mentioned being married. When asked in custody about Adeline's death, he did not deny it. He spoke plainly, calmly. "She wouldn't let me have her the way I needed," he said. "She kept holding back." He showed no remorse, no apology, as if she were nothing more than a project he couldn't finish. Detectives sat with his ex-wives in the weeks that followed. Both had long since left him. Both had stories. One described being tied to the bed without warning. The other, waking in the night with his hands around her neck. Neither had pressed charges. Both had been too afraid, too ashamed, too unsure they'd be believed. Now they were witnesses. And Adeline, gentle, quiet, meticulous Adeline, was evidence. Her body told a story he could no longer silence, and the truth, long buried beneath his charm, had finally thawed. The courtroom was smaller than Corey had expected. She sat near the back, away from the front rows reserved for witnesses and attorneys, shielded from the gallery by a pillar that offered partial cover. 8 months pregnant, her frame swallowed in a draping gray sweater, her hands resting uneasily on the curve of her belly. She had entered through a separate side door, escorted quietly without public acknowledgement. No one looked at her, and she did not look at anyone. Her presence was known only to a few, and it was meant to stay that way. The trial of Martin Brooks began with little spectacle. There were no news vans outside, no shouting protesters. The media had been restricted by court order, the details sealed early due to the sensitive nature of the investigation and the involvement of multiple victims. It was not a circus, not a show. It was a cold, methodical proceeding, draped in formality and silence. Jared sat near the front, stone still. He hadn't spoken much since the autopsy report had been read to the family. He didn't testify. He didn't need to. His presence, stiff and motionless, was its own statement. A son who had trusted a man enough to call him stepfather now sat across from him like a stranger facing a creature he had never met. His jaw clenched with every word spoken about his mother. He didn't cry. He never looked away. The prosecutor opened with a timeline. Calm, deliberate, undeniable. The wedding, the isolation, the messages, the photos, the restraints, the freezer. A narrative laid bare, one fact after another, until the room itself seemed to pulse with weight. Martin didn't flinch once. He sat at the defense table with his hands folded, eyes forward, posture impeccable. He wore a simple navy suit, crisp shirt, no tie. He looked like a man who had come to a lecture. He didn't speak. The confession had been signed days after his arrest, typed and initialed on every page, his signature clear at the bottom. When asked to confirm its authenticity, he had nodded once. She stopped being cooperative, he had said in that document. I gave her every chance. There was no plea deal, no negotiated sentence. The prosecution refused to offer terms. There were no mitigating circumstances, no mental health defenses. His psychological evaluation revealed a personality marked by narcissism, control fixation, sexual aggression, and antisocial traits. But he was found competent, fit, capable. The medical examiner described Adeline's injuries with professional detachment. The ligature marks, the abrasions, the internal trauma, the absence of defensive wounds. Her final moments reconstructed with grim precision. Suffocation by manual pressure, death by asphyxiation, following repeated sexual assault. Her body, frozen, altered the timeline slightly, but the estimate remained consistent. She had died between 9:30 and 10 p.m. on a Saturday night, while the neighbors watched sitcom reruns and teenagers scrolled their phones across the street. The prosecutor presented images, carefully, briefly. Only the jury was allowed to see the worst of them. Others, cropped and sterile, were entered into evidence. The jury did not ask for more. They sat in collective stillness, horror written across their faces in every glance, every downward tilt of the chin. Then came the videos. They were played without sound. Silent footage taken from Martin's hard drive. Clips of Adeline, restrained, unresponsive. Some recent, some from the early weeks of the marriage. One from the night she died, dated and time-stamped. He had recorded everything. It wasn't a secret, not to him. It was documentation, a record of what he believed was his right. No one in the courtroom spoke as the screen dimmed. Then came the statements. The first ex-wife, trembling, described how he had controlled her finances, monitored her movements, withheld affection unless certain conditions were met. How he had once pinned her to the bed and recited a list of her faults while gripping her wrists. How she left him after waking in the night, unable to breathe, his hand pressed firmly over her mouth. She had not gone to the police. She had been ashamed, embarrassed, terrified. The second woman, married to him years earlier, described emotional erosion. How he used silence as a weapon, turning the air around him cold whenever she spoke out of turn. How he once fasted from conversation for a week after she disagreed with him in public. How he called it discipline. How he had threatened to ruin her reputation if she left. She hadn't known about the others. Not until now. Both women cried on the stand. Both broke mid-testimony. One of them didn't return after the lunch recess. Their words filled the room like smoke, clinging to every corner. Then came the statement from Corey. She did not speak it aloud. She sat silently in the back, head bowed as the prosecutor read her words for her. A simple page, no embellishment, no excuses. "I carry life now," the statement read, "but I also carry what I allowed to grow in silence." Her words didn't seek forgiveness. They acknowledged complicity. Her silence, her proximity, her inability to recognize the signs. She had not known what he would do, but she had not stopped him either, and that would never leave her. When the final piece of evidence was submitted, a handwritten note from Adeline's old journal, one that had survived in a stack of library books returned late by a patron, there was nothing left to say. The note read, "If something happens to me, it's because I stopped being useful." The jury returned in just under 4 hours. Guilty, first-degree murder, aggravated sexual assault, desecration of a corpse, use of restraints in the commission of a felony. The judge sentenced him to life without the possibility of parole, plus an additional 15 years. The courtroom remained quiet. No cheers, no sighs of relief, just the sound of a gavel and the turning of a page no one wanted to read. Martin Brooks didn't speak. He stood when told. He nodded. He walked out of the courtroom under escort, unshackled until the holding cell. His face never changed. In the weeks that followed, Adeline's house was cleared. Jared took the lead. He hired professionals for most of it. Couldn't bear to enter her bedroom. The basement he entered only once. The freezer was removed and destroyed. The room repainted. The house eventually sold to a young couple with no knowledge of its past. There was no public memorial, no vigil, no flowers left on the sidewalk, but at her grave a small addition was made to the headstone, not etched in stone, but placed beneath a clear slab laminated against the weather. A simple card in Jared's handwriting. She gave love another chance. It didn't deserve her. The cemetery was quiet. No cameras, no reporters, only wind and silence, and the final weight of a life taken because she did not conform to a man's expectations. In prison, Martin remained isolated. No visitors, no work assignments. He refused therapy. He spoke only when spoken to. He did not appeal. He spent his days reading court transcripts and pacing his cell. Corey left the state, gave birth to a daughter the following spring. She named her Adeline. She did not attend the sentencing. She did not speak to the press. She lived quietly, away from the weight of her name. But her silence, once a hiding place, now served as a reminder, a memorial, a warning. Because the real story had never been about how a man took control. It was about all the times he was allowed to keep it, about how evil doesn't always roar. Sometimes it smiles and whispers and waits for you to believe it's love. If this story moved you, don't forget to subscribe for more. Watch our next videos for more true stories like this, and share this one if you think it needs to be heard.